Oh, my dear, what does it mean? Do you know how many years ago? I think it was 2007 when my first book was published, and I called it Adventure Without End. But the publisher didn't like that, and so we had to think of a new title. And for weeks I went through all sorts of things in my mind. What shall we call it? And then one day I had the idea of spiritual unfoldment. Well, I think at that time the word unfoldment didn't exist. There have been a few other people who have picked it up since then. So I think I'm probably the person that invented that word. And anyway, it seemed to serve the purpose, and the publisher liked it. So we called my first book Wonders of Spiritual Unfoldment. And that name's rather stuck. And then when we were thinking of a name for this channel, well, it sort of naturally came to mind. What does it mean? Well, a long time ago, I wrote a letter. I was a member of the School of Meditation then in London. And I wrote a letter describing my thrill at this gradual dawning of spiritual reality. And back came an answer to do more to share that thrill with others, that discovery with others. So that really encouraged me to write. So I started writing. I started making notes and recording the various insights that I had, mostly arising out of meditation. And then years and years went by, and eventually I had enough notes to put them together. And I began to think, well, I'm getting an old man. What can I leave behind of any use when I die? And I suddenly thought, well, I'll put all these notes of mine together in a book. And lo and behold, the first book was formed. And eventually I found a publisher for it. So that's really what unfoldment means to me. It's this long, gradual dawning realization of the wonderful adventure without end, which I could summarize in one word as spiritual unfoldment. It's just like a blossoming flower, opening up and up from the little limited me and my problems into the infinite love and freedom of spirit. I was a country boy. I've always been a countryman. I was a farmer, yes. I've always loved nature. I've always thought of that as my first teacher. I always naturally turned to the green fields, yes. I think there's no better teacher, really. I'm not one, really, for following human answers. No. What was life about for me? Farming, dear. Farming. I loved farming from the day I was born. I always thought I came into this world to be a farmer. I loved animals. I loved the earth, Mother Earth, naturally. But I've actually, as you're speaking to me from Australia, when I left school and I served my stint in the army, I longed to see what the world was like before men messed it up. So I went out to Australia, had a wonderful year in Australia, out in the Australian outback with the things I loved, horses and cattle and wide open spaces. That opened my horizons. I suppose that's really where life certainly opened up. I don't know that I thought in spiritual terms then, but I certainly responded to those great wide open spaces of the ocean. Of course, I went by ship. People didn't fly then. Wonderful experience to have a long sea voyage. If you're like me, you spend a lot of time leaning on the rail, just looking out into the sea. You know, it's a natural meditation, my dear. The stars at night. I remember the thrill of first seeing the Southern Cross as the ship passed into Southern Hemisphere. You know, we all talk about spiritual techniques and all that sort of thing, but honestly, there's no better spiritual technique than just looking at the sky, you know. There's nothing better. Just, you know, outside my window, just beyond the screen where I'm looking, there's a sky. Well, this morning's a deadpan grey, but even just looking to that, it's bigger, isn't it? It gives you a bigger world than this world of man. So, and what's meditation? What is spiritual unfoldment? It's nothing more complicated than that. It's just turning from the little to the big. That's it in a nutshell, the whole story. And you know, when you get bogged down with ideas and words and different philosophies and teachers, it's so easy just to get lost in all that. Whereas look at the sky, it's all so simple. Gary, I had 10 years of boarding school from the age of 7 to 18. And I wouldn't say it was a consumer-based education, but it was certainly a very conventional English sort of education. It was a boys' school. There were no girls, there were no women, so I hardly knew what a girl was until I finished my schooling. Well, first of all, there was compulsory chapel and scripture lessons every day, so I was well grounded in the Bible and Church of England, and no choice. And there was a great emphasis on duty and discipline in the school. You know, these days the emphasis is all on what do you want, on being yourself. I noticed you, in your introduction, you used the phrase being yourself. I'd never heard of that. I still don't like the phrase. It's just not in my vocabulary, not in my thinking, really. The individual was always dismissed in favor of the community. That's why we were compelled to play team games, because it was the team that mattered, not the individual. Individual success was always subordinate to the service of the whole. Duty and service was much more important than what's in it for me. Much more important. It's not what you get, it's what you give that matters. So this emphasis on the individual that has so taken over life today, it wasn't part of my upbringing at all. Unselfishness was what mattered. Helping others, service. And of course, when I became a farmer, it was all about serving the land. It was looking after. That's what farming is. It's looking after the land. And that's my instinct. That's my first instinct. Even now, I walk out, I see a bit of rubbish. I usually pick it up because I feel that's sort of duty to the land to look after it. You know, I'm very conscientious about not walking or not hurting the soil more than I have to as I walk on it. I was introduced to organic thinking as a very young child. It was during the war, and Dad had a pal who was a military doctor. And this doctor had noticed in field hospitals that flies tended to sit on sick people, on wounded soldiers. You know, they like the smell of wounds, whereas a healthy man, the flies tend to pass him by. And this went very deep into me, and this lesson that the forces of disease and decay go towards the unhealthy, the sick. Sickness attracts disease, doesn't it? Whereas a healthy man tends to not get infected, tends to brush these things off naturally. Well, so of course the same thing applies to plants, doesn't it? And animals and the land itself, because if the soil is out of balance, is unhealthy, it's subject to trouble. Things go wrong. And this is, of course, the principle of that underlies organic thinking. And I took all this like a duck to water. And I really believed in this. And it was a time when people who thought like this were considered cranks and a bit nutty. And so I've lived like with this most of my life, being thought a bit odd and on the fringes of society. Well, that was it really. But so I've always been a bit of a loner. But thank God I seem to pursue it, and much to my surprise, even I got noticed when I was a farmer, as an organic farmer. And I got a bit of minor publicity then, and I used to write a bit for various magazines about my own developing organic thinking. Of course, that developed very naturally into spiritual interest, because what are you dealing with? You're in organic things, you're dealing with this life force. What is life anyway? So there was a natural transition, an unfolding from that love of the land, that interest in the land, that consideration of what is fertility, what is life, what is it that makes it all tick, which gradually opened up to what is man, what is it that makes us tick, what is it, what's it all about anyway, and what's it for anyway. So it's been a pretty sort of constant unfoldment throughout my life, and it's still going on now, I assure you. It's a never-ending. It was a good title for my first book, Adventure Without End, and I couldn't really give you a better description of my life, Adventure Without End. Of course, as a young man, the great adventure was going to Australia. It was in the outer world. And then, you know, first girls and first everything. And gradually the adventure went into, I suppose it goes inward, and then you discover the real adventure is not outward in this world. Well, of course, that's where we start, it's inward. The adventures in this world come to an end, don't they? The adventure within never does. It just goes on because it's infinite. Well, I'd been in South America. I'd started a life of, well, I'd injured myself farming, and so I'd had to spend some time in business and to let my body heal. But I couldn't really bear it, and I had a big quarrel with my father and went off to South America. As I saw it then, to make the world a better place. It was the beginning of the sort of it was called the Third World then, but the fact of world undernourishment, if not starvation, was becoming known in the West. And as a young farmer, of course, I thought I knew how to deal with it by planting trees in the deserts and controlling soil erosion and doing all this sort of thing. So I went off to South America with high hopes of making the world a better place. And while I was out there, after some small success but a lot of failure, I remember I was sitting on top of the Andes on a mountainside one day, and I heard a little voice say, "To make whole, be whole." And I saw myself as an immature young man with a bit of superficial knowledge, trying to teach people older and wiser than myself, the local Indians, local Andean Indians, about life. And of course I didn't understand that phrase then, to make whole, be whole. Who does understand it? I'm still learning, even now. It's been a lifelong unfoldment, what it actually means, but I can develop that further if you like later on. But I'd heard of meditation, and when I came back to England, eventually I looked for and found a school of meditation. In those days before internet, the meditation was almost unknown in the West. And I only ever found one school. There wasn't 500,000 different gurus teaching meditation. The bookshops weren't full of books on it. This was the only school I knew of. But fortunately, it was a very good school. And I was very well taught there. And I worked with them for 20 years. And I received a very good grounding in meditation. And I've practiced ever since. I was 26, and I've practiced, still do, twice a day, every day. I value it greatly. There was a politician, actually, an English politician, who thought deeply about economics and about how society works, what is wealth, what is true wealth. I think his name was Henry George. I think he was an American thinker who recognized that all wealth, that true wealth, actually comes from the land. And most people's wealth is really sort of parasitic in that it's you're playing around with the wealth that originally comes from the farmers, or those who actually work the land with their hands. This is the origin this is what creates wealth. All this playing around on the internet with figures and numbers and things, that's just not really making wealth, is it? It's just riding on the shoulders of those at the bottom of the pile who actually do the work, who actually grow the potatoes, who actually dig the soil. Anyway, he thought this way, and then that thinking developed into really what is man and what is society and all that, and that gradually led on, rather like I was telling you from my farming, as to what is man and what's his purpose, what's he here for, and that led on to philosophy, and the realization that all this philosophy really tends to tie you up in knots, and I'm not sure whether it really gets you anywhere. And then there's sort of something called work on being, there's something even beyond philosophy. And at that time, there was a man called Maharishi, who was a great teacher who was sent out from his teacher, who was based in India, from the tradition of Shankara, who was one of the great medieval teachers of India, whose tradition is maintained there. Maharishi was sent out to the West. And the school that was working along the lines I've just been talking met him and liked his message. and received from him a method of meditation. And then there were those who recognized that some people didn't really want all this background of philosophy. They just wanted pure meditation. So another small school was started called the School of Meditation, which received its guidance from the head of the tradition from which Maharishi came, a man known as the Shankaracharya. And I joined that school. So I received exemplary authoritative teaching from this man known as Shankaracharya, was the man who sits in the traditional seat of this original teacher known as Shankar, who is revered greatly, I believe, in the Sanskrit tradition. So that's where I got my grounding from. This is completely normal, Gary, and happens to everybody. But meditation is work, my dear. And it's a lifetime's work, and I'm still working at it. You see, I practiced for nearly 60 years, twice a day. How many times, how many hours is that? You start off with a few minutes, and then gradually it extends. So it's a lifetime's practice. And it's no good thinking that you can just learn to meditate and go on a retreat or two and read a few books, and that you're going to, because where is the end of the journey? As I say, it's an adventure without end. But you get encouragement very, very early on. Most people begin to think, gosh, wow, this is worth doing. But not everybody, you know. And, you know, the Bible, are you acquainted with the Bible?
Yeah.
Well, you have some knowledge of Jesus's parables. There are lots of parables of the sower, you know, the different seeds that are sown, and most of them are choked by the cares and riches of this life, or they are short of nourishment, or one thing and another, and they don't come to fruition. Many are called and few are chosen, but so many set off on this journey, and for one reason or another, they fall by the wayside. They don't want it enough. They haven't got the drive, haven't got the determination. And but those that persevere, the ones that are determined, keep going, keep plodding on, because it's not all ups, you get your downs. I've been through all sorts of depression and despairs in my life. It isn't all easy. We go through many trials in this life. That's perfectly normal. Perfectly normal. In fact, you know, the higher you climb, the more you fall. It's all part of this great lifelong process of being humbled, dear, and brought back to our senses. And that's, I'm afraid, one of the last things we learn to do is to be sensible. You know, we're so screwed up in our minds. Lost souls, we really are. Lost in our heads, that's the human condition. And to come back to the simplicity, the utter simplicity of just being here now. Well, it's the purpose of the mind. What's it for? Well, there are different aspects of the mind, aren't there? There is what you can call the discursive mind, the mind that likes to think, the talking mind. The mind that picks up ideas and plays with it, asks questions, curious mind. Curiosity, remember, killed the cat. Can lead us into all sorts of problems, can't it? But most of us are curious. Most of us ask questions and do want to know. More and more of less and less very often. And then deeper than that, there is the reflective mind. The mind that may just look at the sky and wonder. The mind that sees beauty. the mind that doesn't want to talk, the mind that just looks like I'm looking at you now. And then beyond that, there's, whether you use the word mind or heart, there's a deeper, even deeper part of mind, isn't there? You can call the heart to do with love. What is the mind for? So you see, there are levels of consciousness, and there are levels of mind, from the very superficial mind to the infinite depth of mind. And it's part of the process to, as it were, gradually unfold this puzzle of confusion and discover what's beyond. There's always a beyond, I find it very helpful to think of the mind rather like clouds in the sky. The clouds serve a purpose, don't they? And we may not like them, we may prefer the sunshine, but without clouds, where would we be? No rain. So clouds serve a purpose. And of course, you've never ever looked at the sky and it's been the same. It's always changing, isn't it? Isn't that an extraordinary fact? And so it is with our mind. It's never the same, is it? And everybody's mind is different. But one of the most amazing experiences in life is the first time you get in an aeroplane. And if it's a cloudy day, you go up through the clouds, and what's beyond the clouds? Clear sky, isn't it? And that is meditation. Because you see, thoughts, and most of us, when we call mind, we just think no more than thoughts, do we? Mind is thoughts, thinking mind, the discursive mind, this ever-changing, often confusing mind. Well, think of it as clouds, and then just meditation just takes you beyond the clouds. Simple as that. Like a balloon. And all these various systems of meditation are really just different sorts of balloons or aeroplanes, which just take you through this lower levels of the mind into the upper areas of the mind, where, of course, there are no problems up there, are there? One of the golden rules of meditation is don't look for results, because all results are just a projection of your own mind, of what you think you ought to happen, or what the chap down the road is experiencing, or what some idea that you think might happen, because you never know. And everybody's journey is unique. There's no standard pattern to it. But what is fairly general is that you're given, do you know what a mantra is? I suppose most of your listeners know what a mantra is. Some sort of word or some sort of focus to attend to. There are so many different approaches to this, Gary. I don't really like talking too much on internet because this is going to be watched by thousands of different people, all different. And I come from a tradition where meditation is taught one-to-one. And this is the way it's traditionally been done. And is in my experience, the safest and the best way to do it, because everybody is different. So I don't like talking too specifically on the internet about it. All I'll say is that as the problem is largely this discursive mind, you are normally given, and if you just choose something out of this discursive mind, a lot of people like to sort of take a word like love, because everybody wants to love and be loved, right? And you can meditate on love. But you see, then the mind will play with that word and will give you ideas of love, won't it? The ideal woman or the ideal man or something. And then you can very easily sort of fool yourself into a yet more imagination, which isn't actually, there's more to it than that. And the point of being given an apparently meaningless mantra that is outside your normal experience is that it has no association. Therefore, if you listen to this word, it's easier to let go all your habitual thinking, and then you can, and that will help you then to because if you look at my hands, you can see them on the screen. If I do that, you see, this is meditation. Well, when you get in an aeroplane, you see what happens to the world, what happens to the airport and the friends you just said goodbye to. You let go, don't you? You're taken out of it. Now, there you are. That's meditation. And if you follow this mantra, which is not connected to anything really in your life, it'll just help you to let go, you see, and discover what is beyond these attachments, these limitations. This is what really keeps us bound in this less than whole existence, in this limitation of normal human existence. Meditation is a journey from limits to the unlimited, you see. This is the normal human limitation, imprisoned, as it were, in the flesh, in the mind, in this concept of Gary or John, this identity with a limited human entity. There's freedom, you see, is to transcend it. Well, Gary, I've already published 7 books, and there are 3 more in the pipeline, which hopefully will be published before I've finished. So if anybody wants to plow through my lifelong experiences, it's all there in black and white and laid out in my books. And it's very hard to pick out any particular thing, because I just had a very, very many windows, as you might say, of realization throughout my life. I'm not one of those that have had just 1 or 2 completely life-changing realizations. Some people say they have. Well, maybe they have, but it's not been like that for me, really. I've had very many, I like the word windows of realization. Most probably I actually have recorded in my books. By the way, anyone that reads need not expect to have the same, because I say, in the real world, nothing repeats itself, does it? No 2 flowers are ever the same, are they? It's only in the human mind that we like repetition. But every grain of sand is different, isn't it? And certainly everything that comes from the real world, which is spirit, is unique. So no one can repeat anybody else's experience. But the great thing, reading and learning about those that have gone before, is encouragement. And this is why it's very useful to learn what other people have gone through. It used to be encouraged to study the lives of the saints. And I've read the lives of very many saints, always been very interested to discover what they went through. And you know, depression and despair is perfectly normal as part of this this long journey of spiritual unfoldment. All sorts of dreadful experiences. It's not a joyride, I assure you. You've got to be tough. You've got to have courage if you want to keep going, because many monsters await you on the way. But through it all, the great dawning is that there's always a beyond. Whatever we experience in this human form, there's that's beyond. You know, beyond despair, these things come to pass. And eventually you come to see that mortality itself, which is everything that dies, is really just a phase, a part of a performance in name and form of that which is essentially nameless and formless, which is really what I am, which is the true being of everybody, which is spirit, which is infinite, which is infinite. And it's in realizing the infinite that you transcend, that you overcome the world. And that's when you begin to be of use to others. And I suppose there was a very significant time in my life. I was living in Russia at the time when I suppose it unfolded into a realization of the work of prayer. And I understood that all this spiritual unfoldment, you know, to begin with, we think in terms of what's in it for me, of what I want to be enlightened. I think of me. But of course, this is only the beginning and a very limited concept. Then you think of working with and for other people, and eventually for the love of the work itself. And as it branches out into with and for other people, it led to a much deeper understanding of what prayer is all about. Because you see, we discover first of all that beyond my own personal suffering, there is that which doesn't suffer. That which is beyond it, beyond the clouds, beyond the depression, there is freedom. Beyond the darkness, there is light. Well, beyond death, there is life. So, as that expands from my experience, it embraces the whole world, doesn't it? Because as I let go the limits of John Butler, where is the end of it? What is not included? When you look down from an airplane, you see the whole world, don't you? But you come to see that, well, there's another old phrase, to be in the world and yet not of the world. And while performing the duties of life, you can put it this way, you are yet free. You know, the actor is not the act, is he? And the seer is not the seen. So yes, I'm sitting here talking to you, and yet there's something sort of like a bird's eye view. There's an observer behind it all, you see, that's watching this performance, which is completely unaffected by it. A higher point of view. So this is sometimes clear and sometimes you lose it, but it's sort of there. You keep coming back to it. This realization of a, whatever you call it, a higher self, an observer of the human scene, which participates but is yet detached. It's not it. So I can look at the human scene. I mean, this time everyone's worried about this virus. Well, yes, one has to do what's appropriate. I put on a mask when I go into the shop like everybody else does. But there's another part of me that's completely free, that knows that nobody dies really. There is no death. Death is down here. Death is part of this human performance, this identity with name and form. But it all takes place within this within this immortal self, which is completely free of it. And then you look down on the world, and it's just a transition. It's a performance, really. It's not what I am. It's a mistake, really. If you think that it's something you take and I come identified with, but it's a mistake, because we become attached to and identified with something that is transitory and is doomed to failure, and eventually dies, of course. Well, anything that dies is not really what I am. Can't be. And the whole humanity is really a lost state. Humanity is not what we really are. What man is spirit, and spirit is undivided. There's one spirit. I am. That's what man is. That's what I am. And when you realize this, first of all, with many, many, many little glimpses, you gradually begin to realize what I am not. Perhaps in talking of spiritual unfoldment, what it's all about, it's very difficult to say where you're going or what it is, because it's beyond words. You can't describe it. But you can eliminate, you see, what I'm not. Every mother will say to her child that this is sobbing its heart out over some little thing. It's all right, darling. It's all right. It'll pass. It's not as real as you think it is. Well, that's on this little scale. What we discover on the big scale. This whole thing the world is not such a big deal as we think it is, really, and the world's tragedies are not really as awful and as wonderful as we think they are, because they just come to pass. They're just they're all working out under law. It is as it is. But man's real destiny is to discover his what he really is, which is this eternal spirit. When you find it, then you don't need anybody to tell you. You know for yourself. That's right. Like when you look up at the sky, or you just feel instinctively that's better, isn't it? You just love it. You just respond. You think, well, what am I getting such a fuss about? What is this to turn to? Life is always about just being here now in this moment, Gary, because we can never be closer to God than here and now. And what do I mean by God? Well, of course, nobody knows, but it is home. And I realize that anything that takes me away from this present moment is part of what I'm not, and is less than being present. It is a less satisfactory, a less whole state than being present. So my entire existence now is just to be totally, if I can, and usually I can't, but this is what I try to be, just present, just literally here and now, hearing these sounds as they come out of my mouth, just being present. And in that there is no fear. It's total, it is I am complete. You know, Gary, I've learned so much from just animals and trees. You know. What do they teach us? Just to be natural, don't they? Because the human problem is that we are unnatural. Just be as natural as your dog, or the trees in your garden, just the grass. Just be natural. There's nothing better. And see, it is natural for man to be what he is. And it's unnatural to be what he is not. And man's entire problem is that he has forgotten how to be natural. But the world is so complicated and there's such pressures on us to be unnatural. It's a long journey, my dears, and you need to be determined. In fact, I remember being told that there's no more important requirement for those that have spiritual ambitions than determination. The difference between a saint and a not saint is determination. So look at me, an old man, 60 years of plodding along the hard path of meditation. I wish you luck on your journey, wherever you start from. But don't give up. Be determined, because you will meet all the forces of the world will rise up to prevent you. All the temptations, all the mockery, and even worse. Think how many of the saints, think how Jesus was crucified. Think of those saints that have been burnt at the stake for their faith. Follow in their path. You may not be burnt at the stake, but you'll certainly receive something unpleasant along the way. I certainly have. You see, there's something called the ego, me. Me is that which is separate, that which is unnatural. We've all got it. We've all got it, and we'll have it until our dying day. And this ego will protest all the way as it feels itself threatened and ignored. It doesn't like it. It fights for its own survival. And this, of course, is the cause of all human conflicts. Oh, me. What about me? I want this. My pride, my dignity, my self-worth. The world is absolutely saturated with ideas of self-worths, being oneself, self-rights, human rights, all this sort of stuff. Ego, fighting for your own individuality. This is all ego, the separate self. So we've got to deal with it. And of course, the way of meditation is not the way of conflict. It's the way of this, to let go. And it's not easy. People will let go what they don't want. Of course, that's easy. Any fool can do that. It's when you have to let go of that which you love most, that which you cling on to, which is very often our own me, of course. We'll let go of everything else except me. This is when it gets difficult. And strangely enough, one of the things we're most unwilling to let go is our own suffering, our own self-pity. Poor me, what a hell of a life I've got. Don't we cling to it? Oh, people love to talk about their suffering, don't they? The injustice of this world and all that it means to me, the unfairness, people's lack of understanding. Oh, we go on about it forever, don't we? Me. Well, this is what gets in the way, you see. This is what's called our separation, what we really are. So there we are, my dears. Let's fight the good fight, you see. That's what our human journey is all about. It's really what you could call the devil, the powers of darkness within ourselves. Age-old struggle between good and evil, isn't it, that goes on in all of us. That's what the work, the real work, is all about.